All right. Well, I think it's time to start. And so greetings to everybody, and welcome to the Color Literacy Forum number 10. I'm Luann Stovall, a member of the Color Literacy Project team and host of the Color Literacy Forums. The forums offer a platform to share innovative content, teaching methods, and resources to expand 21st century color education at the university level across all disciplines, from design and the arts to humanities and the sciences. This project is a collaboration of the Color Literacy Project in partnership with the International Color Association, that's the AIC, and the Inter-Society Color Council, that's the ISCC, and Cumulus, the leading global association of art and design research. Before we jump in, though, please let us know who you are by putting your name, where you're joining us from, your university or place of work in the chat box. An active chat box is highly encouraged in these forums, so please keep your fingers warmed up for comments and questions. We'd like to hear from everyone because we are in this color community together. So let us know who you are. Thank you. For this year's forum series, we chose the theme Color and Context. In this series, we are exploring how different contexts affect the way we perceive colors. This includes spatial, environmental, physiological, psychological, cultural, and historical factors. Last March, we began our journey by exploring the identity and ambiguity of colors through the lens of color philosophy and color perception. In the second forum, we investigated the relationship of colors to the objects, spaces, and lighting conditions around us, with examples from both research and design. The focus of the third forum was color through time, histories, meanings, and practices. Today's event is the fourth and final forum in our four-part series. The title is Cultural Palette: Color's Role in Identity, Gender, and Society. In this forum, we have an opportunity to consider multiple ways that the meaning and symbolism of specific colors has evolved over time and across cultures. But before I introduce our three speakers, let's review the timeline. Today's forum is 90 minutes long, and it's divided into two parts. Part one is an hour long. Each speaker will give an approximately 15-minute presentation. You are encouraged to type your comments and questions in the chat box during the presentations, but rather than take questions after each talk, we'll have a moderated panel discussion with the speakers in part two of the program, and that's from 12 noon to 12:30 Eastern Time. And at that point, your questions and comments will be addressed during the session. Now I'm delighted to introduce our first speaker. Talk one, Lives in Color, Pioneering Women in Color History by Alexandra Loske. Dr. Loske is a British-German art historian, writer, museum curator with a particular interest in late 18th and early 19th century European art and architecture. The subject of her doctoral thesis was the use of color in the Royal Pavilion, a Georgian former royal residence in Brighton, East Sussex, where she is now a curator. Alexandra has lectured and been widely published on the subject of color. Her first book was Color, A Visual History. She's the editor of a volume on color in the 19th century for the Bloomsbury Cultural History of Color. Her most recent publications are Mary Gartside, Abstract Visions of Color, the substantial double volume, The Book of Color Concepts, and The Artist's Palette. In 2014, she curated the exhibition Regency Color and Beyond, 1785 to 1845, at the Royal Pavilion, and contributed to the exhibition Turner et la Couleur in Aix-en-Provence and the Turner Contemporary in Margate. Her research into women in color history is supported by the Center for Life History and Life Writing Research at the University of Sussex, where she holds a research associate post. Currently, she's writing a book about the Royal Pavilion for the Yale University Press and preparing a new exhibition on color for the Royal Pavilion. Without further ado, please welcome Alexandra Loske.
Oh, thank you so much, Luann, for introducing me, and thank you for inviting me to this event. I have just come out of presenting about this Royal Pavilion book, but it's great to finish the day because we're in the afternoon here in England with this presentation. So I go straight in. So as you heard, this came out of my doctoral research. I did a lot of research on the Royal Pavilion, which is a very, very colourful building. And this began in 2008, and since then I've been a colour historian. And during that research, I started, of course, reading anything on colour from about the early 1700s onwards. I used Isaac Newton's Optics, published in 1704, as my starting point, and one of the great milestones in colour history. I'm particularly interested in colour concepts, so ideas about colour, or how you visualize these in diagrams, and of course in by extension also in print culture. And I was completely taken with the subject, and I ran with it, and I started collecting color books or publications on color. And here are just some of these great works on color, all of them important, all of them fascinating. Among them, of course, the great Moses Harris. There is not that well known so in the 18th century, but also people like Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, and I am German myself, so I was able to read him in the original. But I did wonder, where are the women? Because this continues. Great books on color, great works on color, great thinking on color in the 17th, 18th, 19th, and 20th century. And all I could see was men's names. And indeed, if you look at George Field here, bottom left, who was a great color maker, chemist, but also a great writer, and called himself a color man. So if you were in any way involved with the color business, certainly in the 18th and 19th centuries, if you were making pigments and artists' materials, selling them, advocating them, you were a color man. But I did know there were women around who were, of course, there were artists, there were illustrators, but I thought, where are the women in color literature and color history? I did see them pop up visually, so as images, as allegories representing color or painting, usually sort of with certain attributes such as palettes, or as the one seen here on the left by Giovanni Domenico Turini, 17th century, clad in the primary colors. I was particularly taken with the image on the right, which is not a personification of color or painting, but literally of the theory of colors. And here we see a woman recreating Isaac Newton's experiments with prism and so the human visible spectrum. But I did wonder that, and I did think there must be women who wrote and published about color. No doubt it was harder, but I made this my mission. It was sort of a sideline to my doctoral research, and I thought, I'm going to find these women, and this is what I have been doing. I have been creating, collecting, and chronicling a library of color women, because the discrepancy is huge, and this is color history is a small field in the big scheme of culture and history. But and this happens in many other areas of art, culture, science, life in general, historically. That men dominate, and when I looked at Roy Osborne's book, his large ongoing project of creating a bibliography and historiography of books published on color before 1900. Now, when I went through his book and I highlighted all the entries which I thought were by women before 1900, when there is a real revolution in print culture, in printing and publishing books, 430 works are listed by men in predominantly the Western world, and for comparison, fewer than 20 works by women. So I made this my mission, and this is the project I'm most interested in. And today I will give you a glimpse of this work. So here is just a snapshot of my library of women who've published on color. And of course, I couldn't cut off in 1900. First, I tried that, but very quickly I realized the 20th century was the period when women were able to do more. They still weren't equal to men in terms of their opportunities and their access to education and being taken seriously, but much, much more was happening. So I have included 20th and 20th century women. And today, I would like to introduce just 3 of them to you. And I will start by the one who is probably most important to me. She is not the first, but certainly one of the first women I have found who have published and written on color, written and published on color. She is definitely the first woman, certainly in the Western world, who published a book that is not just generally on color, but she herself calls a color theory at some point, and illustrated in the Western world. So here it is. This is Mary Gartside. She was a flower painter, a very acceptable way of being creative for women in the 18th and 19th century. English, she was also a teacher of painting in watercolor, and no doubt her students would have been young ladies. And she publishes in 1805, and this, by the way, is 5 years before Goethe publishes his important doctrine of colors, Farbenlehre. She publishes an essay on light and shade, on colors, and on composition in general in London. And this book is presented like as a book for her students, how to paint in watercolor, how to paint flowers. And it includes lovely etchings, soft ground etchings, which tell you how to foreshorten objects, you know, when you draw, where to place shadows. She includes a color wheel, which is an etching that has been hand colored. And there's no time to go into that in great detail today, but it is a very interesting color wheel. So that's great. But she also adds something very special to her book. She presents her group of colors, and she divides them into 8. And she says, and she relates this to compositions because it should be of practical use, really. And this is how she illustrates them, by not colored etchings, but freely painted blots of color arrangements. And this is really, really fascinating because illustrating books at that time is difficult enough as it is. And to think that these are hand-colored individual works of art is quite astonishing. It also gives an idea of how small the print run would have been, because all of these plates would have to be created. So, and this is what it looks like in the book. It's a quarto format, and here is the blue blot. And this is how they all appear together. So, and I did say, we know that Gartside was aware of, had read Newton, and she identifies 7 chromatic colors. And these are yellow, orange, scarlet, green, blue, and violet, sort of roughly alluding, or, you know, using Newton as a guideline. But the 8th color, which is in first place, is white, and this is really important. So she considers this a color. But you might wonder, well, how is that a diagram? They're fascinating. They look beautiful. They look like abstract paintings. But but what do they actually mean? Well, there is a second edition of that book, and this comes out in 1808. And this is important because it means the first one has been successful. And she is, for the second edition, linked to a proper publisher. And clearly that publisher has the idea to turn this into a multi-volume set. So here on the cover, it says part 1. And it's now called an essay on a new theory of colors. So she elevates this to a theory of colors, and the colored blots appear in the title as well. And they're sort of being developed further with little sort of letters indicating what each area means. And she explains what they mean. And basically, she says these are chromatic formations, abstract form. She doesn't use the word abstract, but these are effectively abstract images of a color composition. And she also assigns individual colors, individual flowers to each of these blots. So this makes her very special. And this is one of the books I published this year of Gartside not only being a pioneer in color history, but also in abstract art. And here, this is what I tried myself in one of the COVID lockdowns to sort of link, to create my non-abstract, real compositions compared to Gartside's blots. The second one I'm going to introduce publishes in the early 20th century, so just about 100 years after Gartside. Her name is Beatrice Irwin. She was born in India to English parents, and she was an actress, so she was a performer, and this matters greatly. And here's a rather condescending sort of newspaper report or clipping from 1912 titled "She Finds Fame in Skimpy Skirts," and she's constantly referred to as a girl or a color girl. And she is seen here on stage performing one of her color poems. So her first publication is not a book on color theory, but a book of poetry. And one of the sections is called Color Poems, and she performs these on stage in dramatic outfits. And think back to that time. We're in the early 20th century, and this is the age of electricity, or the beginning of the wider availability of electricity, and therefore also stage lighting. And I have no doubt that she was inspired by her in her performances by Loire Fuller and others, performing and using colored light in stage performances. So far, so good. She continues on just 3 years later with the publication of this book, The New Science of Color, and this is where the word science age, and this is quite interesting because on the whole, Beatrice Irwin is very much influenced by spirituality, occultism. She's very interested in religion. She dabbles with theosophy, and of course is a performer, but she also has this interest in science. So we have here another newspaper clipping saying the color girl develops a new science. The color diagram in this book is very much in the spiritualist vein. It's a complicated, complex diagram where the three main colors are, or the color groups are spiritual, mental, and physical, and the yellow circle represents the ether. But she goes on, and 15 years later, she publishes this, The Gates of Light, a record of progress in the engineering of color and light. And what you see here as the frontispiece is a device that she has created. And I mentioned her interest in electricity, spirituality, and electricity. She is very active in the Illuminating Engineering Society of America and England. And this is important because it was realized by women from early on that electricity could help you greatly with house chores, could actually make your life a lot easier. However, in this book, Irwin shows off her Irwin color filter, which is a patented device. It's basically just a light source surrounded by transparencies of different colors. Something that seems so simple to us today, but it was a groundbreaking idea at that time. And she goes further. She says, there's so much you can do with this idea of using light and changing light in interiors, but also in exterior spaces. There's various examples of how this light filter could be used in doctors' practices, in museum exhibitions, and in galleries, or even in parks. So an extraordinary woman with great pioneering ideas. I'm sure she would have loved to be a stage, be involved with stage design and lighting in the 21st century. And the last person I'm going to introduce today, and I should say I now do have a very large library of color women. And these are all life stories, as well as stories about color and cultural history. And they reflect the times these authors lived in. Here we have Caroline, or known as Carrie van Beemer. She's German. with a Dutch background, so she has family in the Netherlands as well. She knows from a very young age she wants to be an artist. She loves art. That's what she wants to be, an artist. But she also is very much interested in teaching and in education. She in her work, and not much of it survives. It's really hard to find. See here how she moves from representational figurative art to a slightly more expressionist style, embracing color as an expressive tool. I don't know the date of the one on the right, which somebody sent me from America, but you can see that she is on the fringes of the avant-garde movements in continental Europe at the time. And indeed, one of her teachers is a well-known expressionist painter and teacher, Adolf Hölzel, who also is a color theorist. And he goes through that same process from sort of figurative to expressionist, and then sort of almost abstract. And Carrie van Biemer publishes a wonderful book in 1930. It is published by Eugen Diederichs in Jena, Germany, in this wonderful, with this wonderful design by the expressionist artist Max Thälmann. And it's called Farben und Formen als lebendige Kräfte, never translated into English, but translates roughly as colors and forms as living forces. And this is a very common theme in the early 20th century, in the wake of expressionism and color coming into its own. The power of color is being discussed. It's an interesting book that is, and it's a very good book, I think. And it comes in 3 parts. It has 3 chapters or 3 parts. Part 1 is a general introduction to composition and painting in general. And the teacher comes through there, the teacher Carrie van Biemer. Part 2 is an overview or an introduction to Goethe's color theory, zur Farbenlehre, the doctrine of colors, published in 1810. She is a great advocate of Goethe, or a fan, we could say, of Goethe's. Part 3 is indeed an attempt to bring her teacher's Adolf Hölzel's color theory, which he never published, to a wider audience. And she intersperses the book with plates showing some of Hölzel's work. And one great aspect of this book is that it has a sort of interactive element to it. You can lift the transparent overlays of the plates, or some of the plates. And this is really helpful when it comes to more complex color concepts, such as an explanation of the development of one of Goethe's color wheels, beginning with this, a binary idea of Urfarben, the basic colors of yellow and blue. So here we have it in the book, with the transparency and all the lettering and all the explanation and captions. And when you lift it, you have a much clearer idea, clearer sense, of just the visuals, just the diagrams. And she was successful. She appeared sort of in newspaper interviews, talking about her dedication to her work and her art, and how much she loves color, and how much she enjoys teaching. And that's what she is. This is 1932. The book has been out for 2 years. It is also the 100th anniversary of Goethe's death. And I did wonder, why is this book not better known? Why are so few copies around? I managed to get hold of a couple, and I looked into her story. And Carrie van Biemer was Jewish. And it's not confirmed, but it is highly likely that her books were confiscated in the 1930s by the Nazis, and probably thrown onto these heaps of burning books at the burning of books of Jewish and other authors that the Nazis put on these lists of authors to be burnt. This is incidentally a book burning in Berlin, outside the university where I read English. And this is just a copy that survived the burning, but charred, or by Stefan Zweig. So that's probably where the book ended up. And what happened to Carrie herself is even more tragic, because she did escape Germany. She sought shelter in various places in the Netherlands where she still had family, but eventually in 1942 she was asked to come to a gathering point in Utrecht, where she was last living. And from there she gets taken to Westerbork in one of those terrible train journeys, and from Westerbork straight to Auschwitz and to the concentration camps. And she's 62 at the time, and she gets immediately sent to the gas chambers and is murdered there. And that is the story of Carrie van Biemer. And just to finish with this story, here are the beautiful pictures taken by Kate Steinitz that you saw in that newspaper article. Kate Steinitz herself managed to emigrate in 1936. One of the books I managed to find, of the original copies, I had to order from Canada. And this was in the library of Berta Meyer, and it's inscribed by Carrie van Biemer. And it has little pictures in it as well. And it says basically, this is in memory of our lovely days in Weimar, Germany in July 1932. And I was looking into this and I zoomed into the picture in the book. And here is a group of women and men in Weimar celebrating this perhaps greatest of German playwrights, the epitome of German culture, and probably contributing to the festivities that were going on there. And there is Carrie van Biemer at the heart of it. And all of this completely disregarded, disrespected, and misunderstood by the Nazi government. The irony of history, the cruelty of history. I hope you enjoyed this first glimpse into the library of colour women, which I'm hoping to take much, much further. And I thank you all for listening.
Alexandra, that was brilliant. And thank you so much for everything that you're doing to bring light to this subject. And it's just so important to be able to see the research, to understand that the picture of what actually happened in history was a very different story, and it looks very differently when you begin to really see the full picture. So again, we look forward to you continuing your research, and thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you.
So we will move to our second speaker now. Our second speaker is Carolyn Purnell, and her talk is Blue Jeans, an exercise in contrast. Carolyn is a historian, writer, and lover of all things colorful. She's the author of Blue Jeans and the Sensational Past, How the Enlightenment Changed the Way We Use Our Senses. Carolyn earned her PhD in history from the University of Chicago, and her work has appeared in publications including Psychology Today, Wall Street Journal, City Lab by The Atlantic, and Apartment Therapy. Her research has received recognition from the National Endowment for the Humanities, European Commission, Huntington Library, George Lurcy Foundation, Brown Foundation of Fellows, and French Society for Historical Studies. Most recently, Carolyn wrote and produced Past Your Prime, a short film that premiered at the 2024 Sundance Film Festival. So without further ado, please welcome Carolyn Purnell.
Hi, and thank you so much for coming today. And thank you to my wonderful co-panelists and to everyone who has helped organize this event at the Color Literacy Forum. I just want to make sure screen is working.
Beautifully.
All right. Okay, great. So as Luann said, today I'm going to be talking about one of the most ubiquitous garments in the world, and one of the only ones that cultures across the globe consistently link to a specific color, and that is blue jeans. And as you're going to see today, blue jeans are truly an exercise in opposites. And my goal is to unpack some of those inherent contradictions in the really brief time that we have together today. So on worldwide average, people wear jeans at least 3 days a week. And this year, China actually became the largest consumer of denim in the world. And blue jeans production truly has become a global operation. For example, Uzbekistani and Azerbaijani cotton may get woven into fabric in China, Pakistan, or India. It's then dyed with synthetic indigo from places like Germany and Brazil before getting cut and sewn by factory workers in Vietnam, Hong Kong, or Japan, and then finally being shipped to countries across the globe. But despite jeans' global nature, for a really long time, they have shared a very strong association with American culture. And in large part, that association stems from the immense success enjoyed by Levi Strauss after he patented his signature riveted work trousers for the California mining population in 1873. But actually, by the time his trousers hit the market, a lot of their features were already standard. The Levi's innovation was actually just adding rivets to make work trousers more durable, which you can see here from the Levi's website, they fully admit. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, we know that the word jean is actually much, much older and not American at all. It was already in use by 1567. And while I don't have time to go all the way fully back through the origins of the textile itself, I'm going to just give you the super quick Cliff Notes version. So the cloth can originally be traced back to a fishing village in India known as Dongri, which is where we get the word dungaree, which was actually what blue jeans were called for a very long time. It was then traded by sailors, brought by sailors to the Italian port city of Genoa, which in French was known as Gênes, and in English became jean, before French artists made their own version, serge de Nîmes in the city of Nîmes, or denim in English for short. It actually took several more centuries for the US to enter the denim story. But before jeans could become an American icon, they had to undergo a really major transformation. And specifically, that was that they had to become blue, because a lot of the original dungaree cloth was not blue. In terms of natural colorants, blue is a rarely uncommon color. And I know that during the last forum, Spike Bucklow talked about the rarity and expense of ultramarine as one example. For textiles, the most consistent native source of blue in Europe was woad, which was a weedy plant with yellow flowers that had been cultivated in Europe as far back as Anglo-Saxon and Viking times. And by the 13th century, woad had become a major industry across Western Europe. And it actually became so valuable that a lot of dyers held very prominent civic positions and, actually had access to a great deal of wealth as well. So while Europeans had steady access to woad, high demand often still meant high prices. And throughout the Middle Ages, pure blue really wasn't the common color of a hardworking, casual garment like blue jeans. It was instead often a status symbol, suitable for skilled artisans, wealthy patrons, and holy subjects like the Virgin Mary. But woad had several material limitations. For one, it has a low dye content, and it is not as color fast as the indigo produced by the Indigofera tinctoria plant, which grows really well in tropical regions. Woad is also a very nitrogen-hungry plant, which means it depletes the soil over time. So as Europeans extended their colonial reach into other warmer parts of the globe, true indigo became one of the most coveted commodities. And the European appetite for this blue seemed insatiable, and merchants and producers scrambled to increase the supply of indigo through ever-deepening systems of colonialism and slavery. With the expansion of those systems and of indigo cultivation, blue was finally within the reach of the masses in Europe and in European colonies like America. And by the 18th century, what had once been the rarest color quickly became one of the most popular. Now, of course, just to throw in there, indigo had varying qualities. Bengal's indigo was considered of a higher quality than something coming from South Carolina, or Barbadian indigo. Those were used more commonly for things like workers' garments, military uniforms, slave clothing, everyday goods, items to trade with Native Americans. So there is a stratification of price and quality within indigo as well. Now, today, if you are looking at a range of color preference surveys, blue still reigns supreme across the globe pretty much as the world's favorite color. And the historian Michel Pastoureau has offered a pretty fascinating, or I think fascinating, argument as to why this is the case. And he says that blue became so ubiquitous after the 18th century that it essentially became a neutral. He says, when we declare that our favorite color is blue, after all, what do we really reveal about ourselves? Nothing or almost nothing, because the response is so predictable. In Western color symbolism, blue doesn't make waves, but is calm, pacified, distant, almost neutral. In other words, blue is so inoffensive, it has become almost meaningless. And that's precisely what we see at work in the case of blue jeans. So when a person wears jeans, we don't tend to read that garment as blue or strongly blue. The denim has become so commonplace that the hue is almost invisible to us. For example, blue jeans go with everything. It would be perfectly acceptable to wear a black shirt or shoes with navy jeans, which would violate traditional fashion norms. Or unlike the color pink, which we're going to be discussing today or in a moment, which has become characterized over time as a quote unquote feminine color, blue jeans don't really announce their blueness as especially masculine. So denim really manages to ride this kind of fine line of neutrality with its blueness functioning almost as a non-color. And I think we could talk a lot more about that, but we only have 15 minutes. So if we return to indigo, though, its fortunes went hand in hand with another notorious cash crop, which was cotton. And it is possible to dye cotton with woad, but the color from woad doesn't take as well to plant fibers as it does to those of something like wool or silk. But indigo is very well suited to cotton, which made these two commodities really a dream team. And so this juggernaut of colonialism and slavery, fueled by the twin luxuries of cotton and indigo, completely reconfigured the global economic system. So by the time we actually get back to the United States and back to Levi Strauss, who opened his first factory in 1873, indigo-dyed cotton twill, or denim, was already a very obvious choice for him for his hard-wearing, economical trousers. It would have been very commonplace for him to use that fabric. But Levi Strauss never imagined that those trousers would go mainstream. They were intended as work garments only, and they were very successful in that market. So what pushed jeans firmly into the mainstream in America? And long story short, it was the Great Depression. Because workers who were struggling to feed their families were no longer in the market to buy blue jeans. And denim companies knew that if they wanted to stay in business, they had to find new customers. And so they pivoted and started focusing on middle-class buyers. And at this time, in the 1930s, a lot of middle-class Americans already had a very romantic view of the American West, in large part thanks to Hollywood Westerns. And actually, in this period, fascination with the Old West reached a fever pitch. There were dude ranches popping up all over the United States, catering to tourists who were craving kind of a rustic outdoor adventure. And so denim companies happily jumped on that bandwagon. And they also found a breakthrough market, a secondary market in women. And in 1934, Levi's launched the first line of jeans specifically for women, Lady Levi's. And the following year, Vogue magazine featured the jeans as a must-have for any East Coast dudeens headed west for a ranch vacation. So by the end of the 1930s, blue jeans and the American West already felt like very natural partners, and they were forever welded together in the popular imagination. Now, one of the ironies that I find in this story is that actually real-life cowboys at that point didn't tend to wear blue jeans. They still tended to wear wool trousers. It was actually Hollywood that kind of popularized the idea of cowboys in jeans, and then actual cowboys followed suit afterwards. So I think that's kind of fascinating. Ironically, blue jeans' outsider status as the attire of frontier toughs and down and out workers really helped push jeans even more firmly into the limelight of American culture. And during the 1940s, youth who were looking to break free of rigid social norms started draping themselves in denim. For example, supporters of the socialist movement adopted blue jeans as a sign of solidarity with the working class. And that youth demand continued to grow during the 1950s, thanks to celebrities like Marlon Brando, James Dean, Elvis Presley, and rebellious youth across America were kind of drawn to the casual cool of denim. And when their shocked parents responded with outrage, jeans only became that much more appealing. There are these wonderful letters in the Levi's archives of parents, being irate that their kids want jeans and saying they're not respectable for school, et cetera. And of course, if you've ever worked with teenagers or have them, you know that when you forbid a garment, they're only going to want to wear it more. So by the 1960s, jeans had moved on from simply being a symbol of rebellion, and they then became a full-on symbol of protest. For example, young Black female civil rights activists tossed aside their quote-unquote respectable clothing in favor of jeans and denim skirts and overalls, which was their nod to the clothing and cultural legacy of Black sharecroppers who labored under an unjust system. So we have blue jeans as this garment really indicative of resistance. But of course, today, blue jeans are in everyone's closet, whether you're a CEO or a child or a rebellious teenager. So how did they become such a potent symbol of mainstream culture after they emerge in this kind of blossoming moment of resistance? And to understand that, I want to give just one quick example of how this kind of normalization of jeans happens by looking at how they spread in Japan. So when jeans first made inroads during the occupation of Japan in the 1940s, they were known as Jipan or GI pants because they were an essential part of American soldiers' wardrobes. And they started selling like wildfire because American clothing was symbolically a way to break from traditional norms. So again, that rebellion piece. Secondhand stores could not keep up with demand, prices surged, and jeans actually then became a luxury item in Japan. But once post-war manufacturing surged and global trade resumed, it became a lot easier for average Japanese consumers to find jeans. And as jeans became more available, they became more acceptable. And as they became more acceptable, they started to lose their distinctive Americanness. So soon, Japanese buyers were flocking to blue jeans, not because they wanted to be American, but because they wanted to be more like their Japanese peers. So from the perspective of Japanese consumers, once jeans were readily available, they were just as Japanese as any other piece of clothing. And we actually see this pattern of adoption in other places. The anthropologist Daniel Miller has charted blue jeans adoption patterns in Kannur, India. They have a very low rate of public adoption there, but when he asked people where jeans come from, a lot of people in Kannur actually said they were Indian garments. Not very many people identified them as having American origins. So what we can see here is that jeans history is typically marked by a booming entrance, which then quiets down into this pattern of ordinary acceptance. And I don't have time to go into all of those back and forths, but if we look at the history of blue jeans, we can see it as this kind of never-ending conversation of bouncing back and forth between opposing poles of power. So if we look at, just an average pair of jeans, they could be both casual and catwalk worthy. They can be both ordinary or transgressive, durable and disposable, sexy and slouchy, might have gotten, there we go, masculine and feminine. They can be timeless and trendy, global and regional, normcore and distinctive, liberating and confining, and then of course that color piece, blue, from the rarest color to the most common. So there's this kind of ideological restlessness at work in blue jeans. And they carry so much meaning and so many different meanings that over the last 150 years, they have become this kind of universal signifier that's really malleable to fit any context, any meaning, any political message, and any body. And they've gained such a wide array of meanings that that complex tangle almost becomes something that we take for granted in our daily lives, so that a garment that means so much actually kind of masquerades as meaning very little. And I guess my final thought for the day is that I think it would be really wonderful if we could start actually seeing jeans again, and more specifically, seeing their blueness. I would really like that, because I think that the more that we can recognize the meaning in the objects that we take for granted, the more we can appreciate their immense cultural power. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. I love the idea of ideological restlessness, the idea that color is, in fact, so much a part of our lives and so much a part of the global story, so much a part of history that we don't readily see it. And I know that's part of what we're doing today, and also with the Color Literacy Project, to really bring awareness to the role of color in our lives. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. And with that, we'll move on to our third speaker. I am absolutely delighted to introduce Dr. Dominique Grisard. So we're going to be moving from blue to the next talk, which is It's a Girl, What Pink Reveals About Color, Gender, and Childhood in the 20th and 21st Century. Dominique teaches gender studies at the University of Basel and heads the Swiss Center for Social Research, that's CSR. She's currently doing research on visual arts institutions while developing a gender and diversity monitoring in the Swiss cultural sector, a research cooperation between CSR and Pro Helvetia at the University of Bern. Longstanding research interests are the gender history of color, most notably pink, childhood, consumption and popular culture, visual arts, femininity, whiteness, sexuality, intimacy, prisons, and terrorism. Grisard is the author of Gendering Terror and co-editor of 5 anthologies in gender studies, among them Violent Times, Intersectional Gender Perspectives, and the forthcoming The Life of Beauty. In addition, Grisard has published widely on the color pink. So please welcome Dominique Grisard.
Thank you so much for this generous introduction, and I'm so excited to be here. Also, with these fabulous and very impressive previous speakers. And I presume you see correctly now.
It's perfect.
Awesome. So I'm just going to start, and a growing number of expectant millennials decide to throw a gender reveal party by cutting open a cake to reveal either pink or blue filling, releasing pink or blue balloons, or by staging a spectacular, at times deadly, pink or blue explosion. But what exactly does pink reveal? An increasingly anticipatory and nostalgic, scientific and sensory, commodified and community sharing mode of affirming the gender binary. While all senses are implicated in affirming the gender of the not yet child during pregnancy, seeing either pink or blue has become particularly salient in establishing the visual truth of 2 and only 2 genders in the 21st century. In concert, of course, with pink or blue baby showers, gender appropriate nursery designs, color coded toys, and pink or blue birth announcements, all exhaustively documented on Instagram. They shout, "It's a boy," or "It's a girl." This is an image of a gender reveal party I'm sure you're familiar with. This one happened in Iowa in October 2019. The party kit, labeled by manufacturers as, quote, "the best baby gender reveal ever," involved parents to be firing a rifle at an explosive powder-filled tub, which bursts in a blast of blue or pink. What will the gender of the anticipated baby be? Pink. By situating pink and blue within material culture archives I define color as a particularly effective and affective technology of power in today's visual attention economy. Pink and blue are used to reveal, make seen, and feel gender. Importantly, the term reveal conveys Enlightenment ideas of the visible as proof and truth. It presumes that gender can be scientifically uncovered and seen. It also promotes an understanding of gender development as linear progress. That is, the idea that a pink fetus person will go on to have a girlhood, a pink girlhood, and grow up to be a pink feminine woman, and vice versa for those assigned blue. Typically, there is a team boy and a team girl at the party. In line with the hegemonic gender order, the prospective dad leads team boy and the prospective mom represents team girl. Often this point is driven home by the dad to be wearing blue and the mom to be wearing pink. And once the anticipated gender is revealed, fathers to be go particularly crazy when the news is blue, underscoring that fathers only want and can relate to boys and sons. Again, team girl is symbolized by the emotion of love, a girl in pajamas dabbing, while the boy is symbolized by feet, signifying activity and underscoring the entitlement instilled in boys prenatally, the incitement to take up space and leave their footprint, ecologically or not. Here. Here, the labels boys or boy or girl are substituted by more descriptive, narrow notions of what constitutes a girl and a boy. Boys are anticipated to be tough and hard, like the American football depicted on this shirt. They are expected to touch down, to be single-minded about achieving their goal, to score professionally and privately. Girls are expected to look pretty and to be looked at, like the tutu. In this heterosexualized, predatory version of the gender reveal, the dad is team pirate. The online store in question does not offer the equivalent for mothers to be. Other gender reveal parties, like the one on the right, opt for heterosexualized themes such as mermaid or fisherman. The question is, who catches whom? Does the seductive siren call the fisherman, or is the mermaid the fisherman's prey? An even less subtle predator-prey theme is the shark mermaid. While the laughing shark is baring his teeth, the mermaid barely has a mouth, in line with Disney's Little Mermaid, who gives up her voice to get her prince. There's a clear phallic aesthetic to the gender reveal videos posted on Instagram, a penis-like rod that pops out of a cake, or like in this picture, guns used to spew pink or blue confetti. Anticipation and affect are bound and contained by a pink or blue choreography. But why is pink such a gendered color? Was it always this way? The word pink dates back to the 1300s, meaning pierce, stab, make holes in, like pinking shears, might be familiar with. By the 1570s, the term was also used, the term pinks had become a common name for dianthus flowers of various colors, carnation type. In the 17th century, pink could refer to all kinds of colors, even, and I quote, yellowish or greenish yellow pigment. Tentatively in the 18th century and more prominently since the 19th century, pink came to designate what we know now, a pale rose color, one of the colors of the frilly edged dianthus flowers known as pinks. Flowers, and we already heard that with Alexandra, and I thought that was very fitting. Flowers played an important part in the construction of femininity and also in the construction of rose and pink as girl colors. Elsewhere, I write about the history of imagining femininity as a blushing rose, and I asked why even today flowers make girls' consumer culture bloom. I also interrogate color names such as vermilion, red, and then rose red and rose colored as predecessors of the color names rose and pink, and how they were used to describe the rosy blushing or rouged cheeks of young women and girls. Rose images, stories, and colors have been used in Western Europe since the 16th century to reproduce a floral ideal of femininity defined by the demure receptivity to men. Still, well into the 19th century, the flowers roses were mainly described as red, not pink. Indeed, the color terms rose and pink were mere hyponyms of the color red, which means they were subsumed under the color red in language. Borrowed from the flower name of the noble rose, the color term rose first appears in the second half of the 18th century, slowly came to be used to describe a range of shades from the pinkish white of the common dog rose to the flesh color of the La France rose to the dark crimson of the damask rose and the fiery, slightly bluish shimmering Pompadour rose. Speaking of Madame de Pompadour, she was the powerful mistress of French King Louis XV, and she was one of the people who popularized this color. Initially, the color term rose and pink was mostly used to describe textiles and clothing accessories that, like leisure activities involving flowers, were associated with the world of young upper-class women. There is this myth that pink was once a boy's color, when in fact both little girls and boys of a certain class were known to wear pink or pastel colors. In bourgeois society, colorful dress was relegated to the private realm of women, and children were part of this private realm of women. This means that young boys and girls were dressed rather similarly, while older boys tended to wear subdued blue, gray, and black colors, much like their fathers. These colors were associated with the universal, the rational, the professional, and the seemingly ungendered. Starting in the 1950s, the color pink became the visual marker for a specific type of youthfully innocent femininity, epitomized by Mamie Eisenhower, the young wife of US President Dwight Eisenhower, and her love of all things pink. Like the girl next door, she ostensibly bought American-made, ready-to-wear fashion, except I think this gown for the inauguration. The pinkification of girl culture did not happen overnight, however. We tend to forget that Mattel's Barbie was initially not packaged in pink. Barbie underwent many, many makeovers. In 1977, importantly, Superstar Barbie was marketed to a younger target group. And this also meant that her smile and eyes became bigger and her dresses and packaging turned pink. Of course, Disney played a vital part in the pinkification of girlhood. This said, in the 1950s, the Disney film, the iconic Disney film, you actually see a switching between a pink and a blue costume. So Cinderella, when she dances with the prince, she's switching between those two, and kind of signifies that the color pink was not uniformly a girl's color at the time. It was only in the 2000s, with the establishment of Disney Princess franchise, that pink was used systematically to categorize, market, and price girls and women's goods and services as qualitatively different from boys and men's and so-called gender-neutral products and services. And by systematic, I really mean also something that happens, before birth even, and in a very systematic and thorough way. Ever since, Pinkonomics sells pink empowerment through individual consumption, thereby invisibilizing structural inequalities and power relations. effectively coloring over racial, ethnic, and class differences, while reifying the stereotypical dichotomy between emotional female consumers and rational male producers. Pinkonomics is performed and consumed with a smile, as we see with the Barbie film icon. It describes the hypervisibility of a stereotypical pink femininity as personal resource, commodity, stock, and wager, contrasted by the stereotypical black and white masculinity on the right. Indeed, pink structures the realm of production, given that we talk about so-called pink collar jobs, a term that feminists started using in the 1970s. It structures consumption, given that we know about pink tax, so-called gender pricing, and it organizes care. We know this mostly through pink ribbon breast cancer advocacy, and most notably also, the gender care gap and gender mental load. So Pinkonomics discourse of empowerment rewards women and girls, particularly in certain professions and job markets, and in the heterosexual dating and marriage market, for following the unwritten rules of femininity and feminine sexuality. One of the most persistent rules is investing in one's physical attractiveness, always and everywhere. This entails going to the extra mile and spending extra money for products and services subjected to the so-called pink tax. This work to continuously optimize oneself goes hand in hand with the sexual and affective labor expected of women at home and at the workplace, productive labor and expensive that the color pink masks as the free and empowering consumer choice of women. So this is just one example, this helmet, the so-called pink tax. And the pink tax refers to the extra amount of money women pay for specific products or services. Coming to my conclusion, it strikes me as tantamount to articulate the celebration of the pink and blue binary in pregnancy and childhood, with the increasing visibility of gender nonconforming identities. It also strikes me as important to articulate this gender binary, this pink and blue gender binary, with the LGBTQ community's long history of reappropriating this exact color scheme, and also innocent toys such as Barbie, arguably the most stereotypical pink toy there is today. Since her birth in 1959, Barbie has played a central role also in LGBTQ communities and in their coming out narratives, culminating with the 2023 Barbie film and its successfully pink aesthetic and how it was celebrated also in queer community. As my talk showed, the meaning of color or gender cannot be contained. As we now know from this talk, Barbie has not always been pink, and pink has not always been a girl's color specifically. So things are always evolving, and it is helpful to look to history and to, of course, different geographic contexts to put color into perspective and into culture. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dominique. It's just so interesting to think about what the color codes, about what we do see and what we don't see. And I think the largest kind of comment that I'm thinking of right now is that, as we, we're learning today about the history of pink and blue and women in color. And it's just, I'm looking forward to as we go forward, where we're going to go with that by learning about how these codes operate and how interconnected everything is. So with that, I want for everyone to join me in giving a round of applause to our speakers, Alexandra, Carolyn, and Dominique, for such insightful and thought-provoking presentations. So thank you again to all of you. And with that, we're going to get to hear more because we're moving on to part 2 of our program. So I'm going to ask everyone, our 3 speakers, to turn on their cameras, as well as for having a panel discussion with our 3 speakers. And our moderator is Maggie Maggio. Project. Also, the moderator for your chat box questions is Ingrid Calvo-Ivanovic. and Ingrid is a fellow member of the Color Literacy Project team. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Maggie and for our panel discussion.
Great. Well, thank you, Luann, and thank you to the speakers. It was a phenomenal series talking about color and culture, and maybe more importantly, color and cultural divide. I was looking at it as, we end up with a gender divide, the class divide, the power divide, all these things. So now we're looking at color from this perspective, and I just want to give each of the speakers a chance to maybe comment a little bit on the other speakers' presentations. So if we can do that, we'll start with Alexandra or Sasha, if you want to share a little bit about your thoughts on the other.
Well, some of us know each other because the color world is a small world. So I've worked with Dominique on the cultural history of color, the Bloomsbury cultural history of color. I had heard of Carolyn's work, and I'm constantly being asked, what's your favorite color? When you do sort of your general sort of, Q&As. And I always say blue. But for me, blue is a pigment. Blue is ultramarine, and blue in dress would not be my favorite color. So I think that's what I learned from Carolyn today. And I sort of knew it because blue is not my favorite color for dress. That would be red. But so this is textiles, and yeah, I have very little to do with dye stuffs in my work as a curator. So that's fabulous. And of course, Dominique and I, we had this little exchange in the trial session. Of course, I'm fascinated with the importance of flower and botany and women's histories, and how that all comes together. Grisard could publish or could work in the field of color or be an artist because she painted flowers. She didn't ask to go on a grand tour and paint great history scenes. She sort of stayed within what was acceptable, what was considered a polite art, painting in watercolor. You could even be professional and teach a bit. But through all of this runs a theme. It is botany and flowers, and of course flowers matter in terms of color naming, but to a certain degree also pigment creation, but more color naming, and it's just fascinating. And just as an aside, pink, flowers are the theme in Grisard's work, but pink isn't. Pink isn't. She doesn't use pink doesn't appear. It's the reds. She has several reds. So that would be my comment, and basically how it all nicely links together. Yeah.
Yes. Very nice how it all links together. Carolyn?
One of the things that I think for Alexandra's presentation that really struck me is, we often look at these systems as these kind of abstract ideas, and I love the idea of like imbuing them back with the life stories of the people creating them. And I'm really struck by this concept of the vitality of color that comes through, because I think it's something that, as Luann mentioned with my presentation, and one of the things I think about a lot is how we're constantly seeing color, but are we really seeing it? And people like Erwin, with her color filter, really wanted us to experience it on a different, deeper, conceptual and emotional level. And I think that's something that's really fascinating about color, is how it can exist on this kind of almost neutral perceptual plane, but it also can have such a huge emotional and psychological impact and so much vitality. And I think that's something that's really cool about Alexandra's work, and bringing those stories and bringing that vitality back to something that we often just think of kind of abstractly. And with Dominique's talk, I am so fascinated with the concept of pinkonomics. I think I said this in our rehearsal, but just how even the cultural ideas that get associated with the color can lead to a change in the way that we create, pricing or the economics of different commodities. It doesn't even have to be the material difference, whether it is rare or not. It's actually, the cultural ideas that we attach to something lead to a change in the way it's perceived class-wise. And I loved how you broke it down into, this pinkonomics has these three facets of production, consumption, care. I just think that's a beautiful way to think about what's actually going into the pricing structures of these pink goods. So yeah, I think that's just super fascinating, and I can't wait to think about it more.
Great. Yeah, and Dominique.
So much. I mean, I'm so happy to be on this panel and I learned so much already. And what I would really love to do is going forward is instead of always going to these male, very well-known color theorists to actually sort of, since I'm trying to write a feminist history, queer feminist history of the color pink or of color more generally, to go, to someone like Mary Grisard and to her, the way she theorized color also with the material object of the flower, of the, the rose. And then, but also what I loved is that, the paintings were abstract at the same time, which I always had associated with masculinity. And so I think this is going to be very, very thought-provoking for me, this example, but also the other examples. And I'll just have to, read more of Alexandra's work, that's clear. And it makes me so excited. With blue jeans, I learned so much. Also, I think it's very, very important to think about colors always with material objects. Obviously we put color in history, but also to link them actually to actual material objects like cotton, like the dungarees. And so I thought that was very, very interesting to learn more about this, traveling object, but to really think of this object as not just a thing that is not alive, but it actually actively shapes color and also our perception of color. And the second thing is this notion that things are so visible, or colors are so visible but invisible at the same time. And I encountered that with pink as well. I mean, it's obviously hyper visible and it marks something, but at the same time, a lot of things become invisible because of this. So I thought that was really thought-provoking as well.
That is right along the lines of what we are attempting to do with the project, which is we take color for granted. We are unaware of it until our attention is called to it for some reason. And that has a huge cultural background to it. So it's time, I think, Ingrid, are there questions that the audience would like to ask any of the panelists?
Yes, actually, I will say that most of the questions were already answered by our speakers. So I just encourage our audience, they want to post some other questions, we can also share here. There's a lot of very good comments, very positive about the presentation, the three of you. If I may, I have one question for Alexandra, but I think everyone can contribute if they want. Alexandra, have you found in your study, your historical study of these women working with color, which I think is very important to show and to disseminate. Have you found some particularities of the woman approach to color, and as something you can understand as different from the male color theories? Can you
it's a really good question, and I should also say that I'm urging I'm in negotiations with the publisher to write that big book on women in color. I've done all the academic work, that's done, and I give a lot of talks, and it's hugely popular and it's interesting. I'm being supported at the University of Sussex, not by the Department of Art History, but by the Department of life writing and life history and life writing research. So, and that's what interests me. How were they able to do it? And because of that, because we know women's history is different to men's history. We know that, access to education and, dying in childbirth and all of that. Social constraints, we know all of that. And my question then is, the ones that did, how were they able to do it? Did they have to do it differently? Of course, they are already privileged because they were in a position to publish. Make no mistake. you know, but it's still interesting. It's still interesting. And one thing that becomes clear is that the women, especially the early ones who can publish, have female support. So quite a lot of them have female patrons. So that's sort of, you know, how it operates. And what they, well, are they different? Is there a gendered approach to color? I will stick my neck out here and say, not really, not really. The thinking about color, it really reflects more the culture of the time. You know, what is currently available, what is possible, you know, what's the taste of the time, you know, all of that. What is the preferred mode of, you know, style of painting, whatever, or fashion, you know. At what point can we dye lots and lots of color garments in purple? That matters. But what I do see as a thread through all of the women I've looked at, and I look at everything. I take in gardeners, designers, weavers, anything really, is that they quite often have to go the extra mile. They have to try something slightly different, or they have to be really, really creative and inventive to push something through. And you can see things changing dramatically in the 20th century when book publishing becomes cheaper, and it changes more, and it's actually more interesting, with exceptions, in America, because America does not go through the two wars and all that, you know, so physically, so geographically. And you can see that there's much more creativity and opportunity for women. So US American women in the early 20th century, Emily Noyes van der Poel, Irwin goes to America, of course. There are, and then you have an amazing woman called Elizabeth Burris Mayer. So that might become interesting, because she also writes on textiles and fashion color. So it's that they have to work in different ways and have to somehow get their education and their knowledge and their expertise in a different way. And then maybe that's why the blots are there, because it was a genius idea. I've no doubt it was her idea, and it works, and it makes it the most exciting, I'm going to say this, it's the most exciting book of the early 19th century on color. And not just that, this has paid back. I've been going on and on and on about Gardside since I started my research. 14 years on, this book was sold this year. It's a very special copy that was sold in America, and that's why I was asked to write the book for Thomas Henich. That copy is the most expensive book on color, printed book on color, ever sold. And it's by a woman. So, you know, this is great. So I would say that's what I've learned for now, you know, they have to do it differently, and they have to have the right, different skills. Another one, Mary Philadelphia Merrifield, she was a really, really good networker, and she eventually got government funding in the Victorian age. So it's these sort of, it's the inventiveness, it's the creativity, and, you know, yeah, that's what more so than there's a particular type of color theory or particular attitude to color. No, I think it's more, how do you make it work?
Yeah, it sounds to me as if in this case it's about being exceptional.
Yeah, and breaking through the glass ceiling. Yeah, with color.
Yeah, amazing. Ingrid, any other question? Did you? Yeah.
Yes, I think we have now a question from Carla Tilgman for Dominique. She says, I'm not sure how to word a question, but I am observing that there is a pushback against transgender activism for equity that is creating even more harsh binary lines for male and female. Do you see any of that in gender color representations? Can you express about that?
Yeah, I mean, this is a very, very, very good question. And definitely, I think that's why I think historical context is so important. And of course, it is also a reaction to this push and the advocacy of gender, you know, the gendered blue and pink binary is also a reaction, and in concert, you know, sort of a pushback against gender non-binary, and transgender movements, and the hypervisibility of these movements too. The visibility of the transgender movement and of non-binary children, for example, of course, is then often mistaken as true equality, even though it's usually just media, sort of sensationalizing, making it seem as if that's sort of the norm now, which is, of course, still not true. And there's a lot of discrimination. But yeah, there's a lot of also pro-life movements or anti-gay marriage movements that use pink and blue in Germany and in France, for example, but really globally. So I would say, yes, it's definitely, in concert or needs to be seen in this context, for sure.
Mm. Yeah, so this has been picked up universally as this divided. You're either divided or you decide that there is fluidity. It's binary or it's non-binary. It's interesting. I was curious Dominique, while you were showing the slides, is something like the gender reveal party something that's in the United States, or is it something happening internationally?
I think it's, it started in the US, but it is definitely, similar to the baby shower, which used to not be a thing in Europe, for example, and is definitely now, quite the new normal. And I think it will be similar with the gender reveal parties, which then include more the men. So there's a few differences to the baby shower, but both are highly or hyper-gendered in this very stereotypical way. And also with the baby shower, it could be catastrophic to bring the so-called wrong-colored toy present. It's incredible, the thought that goes into and the faux pas of, the policing also around gender that is happening.
Policing around gender. Oh boy. And its attachment to color as part of that policing. Scary. All right. Ingrid, anything else?
There is another question from Rafael. I think this could be also for Dominique, but maybe Alexandra and Carolyn can also contribute to that. On ancient societies, how color defined gender, how were, I imagine, gender distinctions defined through color? You know about that?
So what was the first part? First part of the question, I'm trying to find it.
Yes,
in
ancient societies, how
ancient.
was gender distinctions defined with color, through color?
I don't think I can answer that. I simply don't know enough about this. Of course, it probably depends very much on which culture are we talking about. Yeah, but I think there's a lot of information on the symbolism of color in ancient cultures. Blue and gold in Egyptian culture. Sometimes quite literal symbolism. Blue is sky, what's above you, but it's also heaven, so it's both, and the afterlife and all that. But in terms of gendered, I don't know. I simply don't know enough. We may have to ask, an Egyptologist for Egypt and for other people for other cultures. But I wonder whether it's been. It always probably also depends on whether there's texts that have been that have survived on the subject.
Yeah, I know.
I guess.
Oh, go ahead, Dominique.
No. I want you to say it.
I was just going to say, I know much more about the class stratification of certain costs of different colorants, whether those are dyes or pigments. And I think that's much clearer, at least in my knowledge, than any gender symbolism. I also do know that, again, depending on the civilization or the culture, a lot of ancient languages didn't necessarily divide color by hue the way that we do today. They had different vocabulary to reflect luminosity or other values of color. So I don't know much about the gendered element, but I would also say that it's not even going to match the idea of hue that we have, pink, blue, kind of that easy categorization. I think that they would be thinking a lot more in material terms and then in terms of other ways of thinking about color generally. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it comes down to, materiality, as you say, Carolyn. How much does it cost to dye a garment purple before aniline dyes are invented in the mid-19th century? And then you do have to tickle the little, snails, whatever they are, to get the Tyrian purple.
Right.
Yeah, right.
Hence popes, dressed in purple and all that.
Yeah. And I think, Dominique, you wanted to say a little bit there as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways it's not going to be redundant, but me too. Of course, I'm a historian of the modern era. So for me, it was already daunting to go beyond that, to go to the 17th century and but it was important to look at these earlier times, but not very ancient times, to look at how the bourgeois society, which was so defined by gender, formed, and the role that color played in the formation of this bourgeois society. So the Bürgertum, the men who are all equal, but of course, women were not, and women were the colorful ones who were sort of the status symbols of these equal men who were then, dressed in subdued colors, in the rational colors, and performed the rational masculinity, which was a different kind of masculinity to the aristocracy before the bourgeois, gender order. And that was important. So the distinction of these bourgeois men was not only the distinction between them and their wives, but mostly a distinction between them and the aristocracy, who were then depicted as colorful, flamboyant, effeminate, and all that. So to me, that sort of change, the slow change, of course, from this aristocratic society, or where class was important, to a society where supposedly class is less important. Of course, that's not true. But gender then became sort of the one that was articulated and in sort of the narrative. Yeah, that would be my answer.
Yes, this interconnection between gender, class, and power, I think, is what we're ending with. So I think we're getting close to the time that we need to tie this up. So I think that there's a recording that's going to be available. I'm going to turn it back over to Luann to close out the forum.
Thank you so much. And I want to, if you all want to turn on your cameras too, right now, I think we all would just like to give a huge round of applause to our speakers, Alexandra, Carolyn, and Dominique, for sharing your research and ideas with us. So thank you so much, stimulating all this conversation. Also, I want to thank Maggie and Ingrid for moderating the discussion, and thank you to everyone here today for being part of our forum, because really the color community is all of us, and we really value those connections. So before we adjourn, I would like to invite you to join us in the new year for our 2025 forum series. It's going to be titled Facts and Myths About Color, and we will be shining the forum light on color misconceptions. There will be 4 forums in this series. The first is set for Saturday, March 1st. So keep posted on that one. We'd love to see you there. Details about the event will be posted on the Color Literacy Project website. So we encourage you to please visit the website. I think maybe someone can put it in the chat box for us before we adjourn. It is colorliteracy.org. We encourage you to visit and learn more about the project. Check out previous recordings from the previous forums on our YouTube channel. And this one will be up on the website and also on our YouTube channel within 2 weeks for sure. So with that said, thank you so much to everyone. Please keep in touch and enjoy your life in color. Take care.